Welcome to the Inner Citadel. In this chapter, we begin where overthinking usually begins, with a thought that arrives too quickly, and a mind that treats it like truth before it has been examined. The messages you already sent, the conversation you keep replaying in the dark, the future you cannot inspect, yet keep trying to manage by mental rehearsal. The body is here, but attention has wandered into the past, the possible, and the imagined audience. That is where the loop begins. Rule 1 is simple. Name the loop before it names you. Do not merge with the mental noise just because it is loud, familiar, or emotionally charged. Chrysippus is the anchor for this rule. From the fragments and later reports that remain, we can still recover a decisive Stoic insight. An impression is not yet a judgment. Something flashes across the mind, and that first appearance is not the same as consent. It is not the same as knowledge. It is not the same as fact. The mind often skips that difference and rushes straight into a story, a prediction, a verdict, or a self-blame script. Stoicism interrupts that leap. That distinction matters because overthinking rarely begins with reason. It begins with contact. A memory appears, a sentence someone said returns, a possible embarrassment rises, a future problem takes shape before there is any evidence that it will unfold that way. If you never pause, your inner life becomes a courtroom, where every passing impression is admitted as testimony. Chrysippus gives us a stricter discipline. First, see the impression for what it is, then ask whether it deserves assent. That single gap is where freedom starts. Practically, this means you do not answer the loop by arguing with every detail in it. You answer by naming its species. This is replay. This is prediction. This is self-protection disguised as planning. This is the mind searching for certainty it cannot obtain. Once named, the pattern loses some of its authority. You can sit in a chair, feel your pulse, notice the tension in the jaw, and say, a story is trying to take over. Then you return to what is actually in front of you. The room, the task, the breath, the next sentence, the next action. Epictetus sharpens the method that follows. What is not up to you does not become yours just because you worry about it harder. The past does not reopen. Another person's opinion does not become controllable through internal rehearsal. The future does not become safer because you have mentally visited it 20 times. What belongs to you is the response, whether you assent, whether you revisit, whether you act, whether you release. A caution is necessary here. Naming the loop is not the same as forcing it away. Stoicism is not suppression, and it is not a demand to feel nothing. The goal is steadiness, not numbness. You only create another fight inside the mind. Instead, let the thought appear, identify it honestly, and refuse to elevate it without examination. That is quieter, and it is stronger. Make this part of daily practice. The moment you catch yourself replaying, pause long enough to label what is happening in plain language. This is rumination. This is an imagined conversation. This is fear trying to predict everything. Then choose one concrete act that belongs to the present. Answer the email, wash the cup, open the document, take the walk, begin the work. You are not trying to win against your mind. You are training it to stop mistaking every impression for authority. One loop named clearly is already weaker. Over time, that habit becomes the first gate of a quieter life. Rule 2 is to separate the event from the story your mind keeps adding. A coworker sends a short reply. A friend leaves you on read. Someone in a meeting looks distracted while you are speaking. The body tightens before the mind has even finished the sentence. Then the private narrator wakes up and starts building a case. They are annoyed. They dislike you. They are judging you. Something is already going wrong. The pressure comes fast because the mind does not merely register what happened. It rushes to complete the picture. Overthinking thrives in that gap between fact and interpretation. Stoicism begins by refusing to confuse the two. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that remain to us, is especially useful here because his logic points to a simple discipline. An impression is not yet a judgment. Something appears, that is all. The first appearance is not identical with the conclusion you attach to it. If a message is brief, the message is brief. If a face is unreadable, it is unreadable. Everything beyond that needs examination, not obedience. Epictetus teaches the practical side of this same rule. He keeps returning to the difference between what shows up in the mind and what we choose to do with it. You do not have to sign your name under every thought that arrives. You can pause, inspect it, and ask whether it belongs to reality or to your fear of reality. That pause is not denial, it is discipline. It is the moment where you stop letting an impression become a verdict without a hearing. Use that discipline in ordinary situations. When a message feels sharp, read it once for the literal content. What words are actually there? What facts are present? Then write down the story separately if you need to. Story, they are upset. Story, I ruined everything. Story, this means I'm falling behind. Once the two are separated, the story loses some of its power to masquerade as evidence. Often you will discover that the event is much smaller than the emotional movie attached to it. That said, this is not a command to become cold or suspicious of everyone. Some stories will turn out to be partly true. You may still need to ask a clarifying question, apologize, revise your plan, or set a boundary. Stoicism does not ask you to ignore reality. It asks you to stop inflating it before you have checked it. The danger is not only fear, but premature certainty. Overthinking often feels intelligent precisely because it produces a lot of language. But volume is not accuracy. Practice this daily in small moments so it becomes natural when the stakes rise. When something unsettles you, write 2 lines, what happened and what I am adding. Then choose one response based only on the first line. If no action is needed, release it. If action is needed, keep it simple and direct. In that way you train the mind to return from drama to evidence, from invention to judgment, from spiraling to seeing. That is how a quiet mind is built, not by forcing every thought to disappear, but by refusing to let the story outrun the fact. Rule 3 is this: do not assent too quickly. So much overthinking begins with speed, not with depth. An impression arrives and the mind rushes to sign it into law. A late reply becomes rejection. A small mistake becomes proof of inadequacy. A strange look becomes a full story about your place in the room. The real danger is not the first thought itself. The danger is how quickly it is promoted into a verdict. This is where the Stoics are especially precise. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that preserve his method, is remembered for insisting on the difference between an impression and a judgment. That distinction is the hinge of this whole chapter. Something appears before you. It may be vivid, urgent, and emotionally charged, but it is not yet wisdom. It does not deserve automatic assent just because it arrived with force. The mind has a duty to examine, not merely to echo. Seneca returns to this same pressure in a more human register. He saw how people suffer twice, first from the event, then from the story they build around it. A worried mind rarely stops at what happened. It runs ahead, attaches motive, predicts consequence, and rehearses loss. The result is a kind of mental overcommitment. You have not only noticed the problem, you have already sentenced yourself, the other person, and the future. The practical move is simple, though not always easy. Place a delay between impression and agreement. When a thought says, "This is a disaster," answer, "Not yet decided." When it says, "They must think I'm foolish," answer, "That is one reading, not a fact." When it says, "I already know how this ends," answer, "I do not know that." This is not denial, it is discipline. You are not suppressing the thought, you are refusing to crown it before the evidence has been weighed. That pause matters in ordinary life, in an inbox, in a tense conversation, in the silence after you speak, and begin to wonder how it landed. In all of those places, the overthinking mind wants instant closure, and it usually manufactures the wrong kind. The Stoic discipline asks for something calmer and stronger. Hold the impression at arm's length until reason has tested it. Ask what is actually known, what is assumed, and what is still open. There is also a caution here. Waiting before you agree does not mean becoming cold, passive, or endlessly skeptical of everything. Some impressions are accurate. Some concerns really do deserve action. The point is not to mistrust every signal. The point is to stop giving your first reaction the authority of final truth. A mind that never pauses becomes easy to manipulate by fear, by pride, or by old habits of self-attack. Make this a daily practice. Once or twice a day, catch one strong impression and write it in 2 lines. First, the bare event. Second, the story your mind wants to add. Then ask whether you are prepared to assent to that story on the evidence available. If not, leave it unapproved. This is how calm begins, not by forcing silence, but by refusing premature agreement. One careful pause can save you from an entire evening of unnecessary judgment. Rule 4 is to return to the next action that belongs to you. When the mind starts spiraling, it usually reaches for total solutions. The whole conversation, The entire career, the relationship as a finished story, the future reduced to one huge verdict. That is where overthinking feeds itself. It asks for a complete map before you have even taken the first step. The result is paralysis dressed up as analysis. Stoic discipline breaks that spell by shrinking the frame. Epictetus is useful here, because he keeps bringing attention back to what is actually within your reach. The choice in front of you, the response available right now, the duty that is waiting in this moment. You do not need to solve your whole life in order to live it well. You need to answer the next demand honestly. In Stoic terms, the mind stops serving the present when it tries to control what is not present. The body can be here while attention is lost in a dozen imagined meetings with tomorrow. Chrysippus helps clarify why this matters. An impression arrives, but it is not yet a settled judgment. The thought that says, I am behind, or I ruined everything, or I have to figure this out immediately, is still only an impression. It becomes dangerous when you treat it as a command. Returning to the next action interrupts that chain. It gives the mind something solid to do, instead of letting it continue building castles out of uncertainty. In practice, this can be almost disappointingly small. Send the one message that needs to be sent. Put the plate in the sink. Write the first sentence. Make the call. Pay the bill. Stand up and walk to the room where the work actually happens. The point is not to pretend the larger problem does not exist. The point is to stop demanding that your nervous system carry the whole future on its back. A single action done cleanly is a form of self-command. It proves that you are not at the mercy of the spiral. There is a caution here, though. The next action is not the same as impulsive action. Stoicism is not a license to flee discomfort by staying busy every second. The action must belong to reason, not to panic. Sometimes the next action is to wait. Sometimes it is to gather one fact before deciding. Sometimes it is to admit that no action is possible yet and to release the demand for certainty. The discipline lies in choosing honestly, not frantically. Make this a daily practice. When you catch yourself drifting into the endless interior courtroom, ask a narrower question. What is the next action that belongs to me? Here and now. Then do only that. Not the 10th step, not the final solution, just the next rightful movement. Over time, this becomes a habit of calm. The citadel of the mind is not defended by controlling every horizon. It is defended by returning, again and again, to the stone beneath your feet. Rule 5 is to stop treating uncertainty like an enemy. The mind hates open space when it wants a guarantee. It wants to know how the conversation will end, whether the message will be misunderstood, whether the choice will pay off, whether the future will reward all the energy already spent imagining it. And because it cannot know, it starts building private disasters to occupy the gap. That habit feels like preparation, but often it is only anxiety wearing a practical mask. Stoicism begins somewhere cleaner than panic, with the fact that not every unknown is a danger. An impression arrives, a worry appears, a possibility flashes across the mind. That does not mean it is true, urgent, or worthy of your assent. Chrysippus is useful here, even if only through fragments and later reports, because his teaching supports the central Stoic move. The first appearance is not yet a judgment. Uncertainty becomes unbearable when the mind turns a gap in knowledge into a verdict. The gap itself is not the problem. The rush to fill it with fear is. Seneca wrote repeatedly about the way people suffer in advance, and that insight remains sharp, because it describes an all too human mistake. We are often exhausted not by what has happened, but by the endless rehearsal of what might happen. Tomorrow is asked to carry every version of catastrophe at once. Then today is abandoned to defend against shadows. Stoic discipline interrupts that waste. It does not ask you to pretend the future is safe. It asks you to stop treating uncertainty as proof of harm. Practically, this means drawing a hard line between preparation and rumination. If there is a useful action, do it. Clarify the email, make the call, gather the facts, set the boundary, write the plan, then stop. If the mind tries to continue by inventing 10 more outcomes, recognize the move for what it is, not foresight, but appetite for control. You do not need to mentally live through every possible disappointment in order to be responsible. There is also a caution here. Stoicism is not denial. It does not tell you to smile at risk, ignore consequences, or confuse calm with passivity. A wise person can see uncertainty clearly and still act with care. Cleanthes, in the surviving hymn, and in the spirit of the fragments associated with him, stands for endurance under a larger order. Continue with your task even when the whole pattern is not visible to you. That is not resignation. It is disciplined trust in work that can be done now. So make uncertainty ordinary. Let it sit in the room without promoting it to the throne. When you notice the urge to predict everything, return to the question that actually belongs to you. What is the next responsible step? Answer that and leave the rest to time. A daily practice can be very small. Pause, name the unknown, separate fact from forecast, and go forward. Then, choose one concrete action. Repeat that enough times, and the mind slowly learns that the future does not have to be solved before the present can be lived. Rule 6 is to prepare then act. This is where overthinking often wears a respectable mask. It tells you that you are being thorough, mature, even disciplined. But very often what is happening is simpler and less flattering. The mind is trying to postpone exposure to reality. It wants one more review, one more search, one more imagined rehearsal before it has to step into the room, send the message, make the call, or begin the task that actually matters. Stoic preparation is not that kind of delay. It is not mental spinning. It is a deliberate arrangement of what is needed so that action can happen cleanly. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that preserve his thinking, anchors this whole method. An impression is not yet a judgment. That matters here because the thought, "I am not ready," may arrive with force, but force is not proof. The appearance of inadequacy is only an impression until you decide what to do with it. You do not have to obey every feeling of incompleteness before you begin. There is a practical shape to this rule. Prepare the notes before the meeting, set the alarm before you sleep, lay out the clothes, fill the water bottle, open the document, write the first line, send the one email, make the one list, then stop. If the preparation has done its job, it should make contact with the world easier, not forever unnecessary. Too much planning turns into a hiding place. A short, exact preparation becomes a bridge. Seneca is useful here, because he warns in his surviving letters and essays against the way imagined future trouble can grow larger than the trouble itself. We rehearse failure so long that the rehearsal begins to feel like action, yet nothing has been risked, nothing has been chosen, and nothing has been done. The Stoic answer is not blind haste. It is to prepare enough that your action is intelligent, then to refuse the temptation to keep polishing the doorway while never walking through it. Use that distinction carefully. Real preparation reduces friction. Anxious postponement feeds on friction and then calls itself prudence. If you are checking the same plan 5 times, reopening the same decision, or waiting to feel perfectly certain before you begin, the work has already crossed into avoidance. And avoidance has a cost. The longer you delay, the more energy the mind spends defending the delay. That is how a simple task becomes a whole theater of pressure. The caution is important. Stoicism does not ask you to leap without thought, and it does not praise carelessness as courage. Preparation matters, but once preparation is complete, continued rumination no longer serves the task. It only trains your attention to distrust your own ability to act. A quiet mind is not a mind that has considered nothing. It is a mind that knows when consideration must end. So make this a daily practice. Choose one action that deserves preparation and one point where you will stop preparing and begin. Name that stopping point in advance. After I review this once, I will send it. After I pack this bag, I will leave. After I make this outline, I will start. That small boundary teaches the mind that preparation exists for service, not shelter. And once the boundary is crossed, let the action carry the burden. That is the Stoic move. Prepare with care, then trust the deed more than the rehearsal. Rule 7 is to accept the first hit without panic. A sudden criticism, a strange glance, an awkward silence, a delayed response. These things strike the mind before reason has fully woken up. The body reacts first. The mind then rushes to explain, predict, and defend. That second movement is where overthinking begins, not in the event itself, but in the story built on top of it. If you can meet the first impact without adding a second one of your own, you recover a surprising amount of freedom. Epictetus is especially useful here, because he keeps bringing attention back to what is up to you and what is not. The first impression may not be up to you. Someone's tone, their pause, their expression, the timing of a message, all of that arrives before you have time to arrange it into comfort. What is up to you is whether you instantly treat that impression as truth, whether you turn it into a verdict about yourself, and whether you hand your mind over to a scene it has not even finished understanding. Stoic training does not demand that you feel nothing. It asks you not to confuse the first spark with the final fire. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that preserve his thought, helps anchor this discipline more deeply. An impression is not yet a judgment. That gap matters. Between what happens and what you conclude, there is room for assent or refusal. If you collapse that gap, then every glance becomes rejection, every pause becomes danger, and every inconvenience becomes a personal story. But if you keep the distinction alive, you can notice this is only an impression. It is data, not destiny. It deserves inspection, not instant obedience. In practice, this means building a small delay between the hit and the reaction. When something lands badly, do not immediately answer, explain, text back, or mentally prosecute the entire situation. Breathe once, unclench the hands, let the initial heat pass through without making it your counselor. Then ask one simple Stoic question. What exactly do I know, and what am I inventing? Often the first answer is thin. It may be no more than I felt embarrassed or I do not yet know what that silence means. That is enough to stop the machine from escalating. There is an important caution here. Accepting the first hit does not mean denying pain, pretending confidence, or forcing a calm face while you are boiling inside. Stoicism is not emotional censorship. It is the refusal to let the first reaction become the commander of your character. If the feeling is strong, acknowledge it plainly. If you need time, take time. If a response is required, make it clean rather than theatrical. The aim is not to look unshaken. The aim is to remain governable. Make this a daily practice. The next time someone's words sting, or a plan goes sideways, or a message arrives that triggers that familiar spike of tension. Name the event before you name your worth. Then wait. Give the mind a brief interval in which it can stop producing drama and start producing clarity. Over time, this becomes a habit of steadiness. The first hit still comes, but it no longer controls the whole exchange. You learn to meet impact without panic, and that is one of the quiet beginnings of a freer mind. Rule 8 is to train the pause. When the message arrives, when the comment lands, when the request feels urgent, the nervous habit of the age is to answer instantly. We live surrounded by prompts that reward speed more than clarity. A half-read email can pull the mind into a spiral. A sharp text can trigger a defense before you have even understood what was said. An unexpected problem can make the imagination race ahead of the facts. In that climate, the person who reacts fastest often feels powerful for a moment, but not necessarily wise. Stoicism interrupts that reflex by inserting a deliberate gap between impression and response. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that preserve his thought, is central here. An impression is not the same thing as a judgment. Something has appeared to you. That does not mean you must immediately believe it, obey it, or build a whole conclusion on top of it. The mind can receive a spark without becoming a fire. That is why the pause matters. It is not hesitation in the weak sense, not avoidance, not silence born of fear. It is a disciplined refusal to let the first impulse become your verdict. Epictetus keeps the practical edge of this teaching alive. What arrives is not fully up to you, but your response belongs to you. That response begins with attention. Before you answer, before you explain, before you defend yourself, you take back a few seconds of ownership. Seneca is useful here as well, because he understood how quickly the mind can magnify a moment into a catastrophe. Much of our suffering, he suggests across his letters and essays, comes from adding dread, anticipation, and imaginary consequences before life has even finished speaking. The pause cuts through that habit. It says, wait, let the event be only the event. Let the feeling be only a feeling. Then decide what action is actually required. In practice, the pause can be simple. Put the phone down for 30 seconds, unclench your jaw, read the sentence again before replying. Walk to another room before responding to a tense conversation. If you are upset, do not make the moment larger by forcing yourself to perform certainty. Give yourself enough stillness to distinguish danger from discomfort, fact from story, duty from panic. Sometimes the right move will still be immediate. Sometimes it will be delayed. The point is that the delay is chosen, not imposed by reflex. There is a caution here. The pause is not a license to avoid action altogether. Overthinking loves to disguise itself as deliberation. You can stand still for so long that indecision starts to feel like prudence. Stoicism does not praise endless suspension. It asks for a brief, lucid interval that leads somewhere. Pause, yes, then judge, then act, then let the matter rest. Make this a daily discipline, train it on small things, so it is available for larger ones. Pause before sending the reply. Pause before assuming disrespect. Pause before telling yourself the worst. Over time, that space becomes familiar, and the mind learns that it does not have to sprint after every impression. A person who can pause can think clearly. A person who can think clearly is harder to manipulate, harder to panic, and easier to guide by reason. That is not passivity, it is self-command. Rule 9 is to stop rehearsing imagined humiliation. A great deal of overthinking is not really thinking at all. It is a private performance. The mind puts you on a stage, fills the room with invisible faces, and then forces you to watch yourself stumble, freeze, get corrected, get laughed at, or be quietly dismissed. None of this is happening in front of you right now, but the body reacts as if it were. Shoulders tighten, breath shortens, attention narrows, and once the internal movie starts, it can consume the very energy you need to deal with the real day. Stoic discipline begins by refusing to confuse an image with an event. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that remain, is valuable here because he helps frame the first break in the chain. An impression arrives, but it is not yet a judgment. The picture of humiliation is only a picture. It may be vivid, embarrassing, and emotionally charged, but it is still something the mind has added. That matters, because you do not have to obey every dramatic scene that appears in consciousness. You can notice it without accepting its script. Posidonius is useful for this chapter because repeated emotional habits do not stay harmless. The more often you rehearse shame, the more familiar that pathway becomes. The mind learns the route. It begins to return there automatically, as if embarrassment were a duty. But habits are trained both by repetition and by interruption. If you repeatedly feed the same mental movie, you strengthen it. If you repeatedly interrupt it and return to reality, you begin to weaken its grip. That is not magic. It is character work. The practical response is simple, though not always easy. When you catch yourself staging the humiliation, label it plainly. Imagined criticism, imagined rejection, imagined embarrassment. Do not debate every detail of the scene. Do not cross-examine a future that has not arrived. Instead, bring your attention back to what is actually in front of you. If you are in a kitchen, wash the dish. If you are at your desk, open the document and write one line. If you owe a message, send the clear version and stop revising it for 10 more minutes. The goal is not to become numb. The goal is to recover contact with reality. There is a caution here. Some people try to defeat imagined humiliation by hardening into denial, pretending they never care what others think. That is not strength. It is another performance. Stoicism does not ask you to become indifferent to all judgment or to erase ordinary human sensitivity. It asks you not to hand your life over to a scene built out of guesses. You may care. You may feel exposed. You may prefer not to be misunderstood, but those feelings do not get to run the whole day. A useful daily practice is to meet the private movie the same way each time. Then, redirect to one concrete task that serves the moment. Over time, the mind learns a different reflex. Instead of spiraling into a courtroom of imagined eyes, it returns to the actual room, the actual page, the actual person, the actual duty. That is where calm begins, not in never feeling the sting of possible embarrassment, but in refusing to live inside the rehearsal of it. Rule 10 is to refuse the trap of other people's opinions. By the time someone reaches this point in the video, the pattern is usually familiar. A message gets sent, a meeting ends, a post goes live, a room goes quiet, and then the mind starts hunting for approval like it is oxygen. You replay the sentence you used, the expression on someone's face, the delay in their reply, the imagined criticism that may not even exist. That kind of overthinking does not always sound like vanity. Often it sounds like caution. It feels like being responsible. But underneath, it is frequently the same old demand. I need the room to tell me I am safe. Stoic teaching cuts through that spell by separating reputation from character. What other people think belongs to them. What you choose, what you intend, what you stand for, and how you act with honesty belong to you. Epictetus is useful here because he keeps returning to the boundary between what is up to us and what is not. Other people's opinions, moods, assumptions, and approvals are outside your command. Your use of judgment is not. That distinction matters because it changes the job. You are not being asked to control the audience. You are being asked to govern your response. Cleanthes gives this rule its posture. The surviving hymn associated with him praises a universe ordered by reason and asks for willing cooperation with what is right. That spirit is not passive and it is not desperate. It suggests that a person can endure social pressure without becoming internally owned by it. Approval may arrive, or it may not. Respect may be earned slowly or misunderstood for a time. The Stoic task is not to manufacture universal liking. It is to remain faithful to duty, even when praise is missing. In practice, this means you stop asking every decision to pass through the committee in your head. Before you send the email, ask whether it is clear and fair. Before you speak, ask whether it is true and necessary. Before you bend your values to fit a room, ask whether you are acting from wisdom or from fear of being judged. If the action is sound, the fact that someone might disapprove does not automatically make it wrong. If the action is unsound, applause does not rescue it. The caution is important. Refusing the trap of other people's opinions does not mean becoming cold, rude, or dismissive. Stoicism is not social blindness. You still listen, you still learn, you still correct what is careless or unjust. What you do not do is hand your center of gravity to strangers, critics, or the crowd. There is a difference between taking counsel and becoming governed by it. A good daily practice is simple. Once a day, notice one moment when you feel the pull of approval. Name it directly. This is the urge to be liked. This is the fear of being misunderstood. Then ask one sober question. What response would I choose if approval were unavailable? That question does not make you indifferent. It makes you free enough to act with dignity. And when the mind starts begging the room for permission, return to the bronze gate. Let the noise stay outside. Keep your work inside the citadel. Rule 11 is to limit repetition. Overthinking often disguises itself as diligence. It tells you that one more replay will make you wiser, that one more scan of the conversation will reveal the hidden mistake, that one more look at the decision will somehow remove uncertainty. But repeated thought is not the same thing as better thought. At a certain point, the mind is no longer investigating, it is circling. And when a mind circles long enough, it starts to mistake motion for progress. This is where Chrysippus is useful, even through fragments in later reports. His importance for Stoic logic lies in the distinction between what first appears and what we later conclude. An impression arrives. Then the mind adds comments, warnings, predictions, and accusations. If the evidence has not changed, repeating the same inner commentary does not improve judgment. It only hardens the loop. Stoic discipline asks for a cleaner standard. Examine the impression, compare it to what is actually there, and then either assent, suspend, or act, not endless revisiting, not emotional rereading. A judgment should be formed by reason, not worn down by repetition. That matters in ordinary life because many of the thoughts that exhaust people are not new thoughts at all. They are the same scene with different lighting. You sent the message, and now you reread it 10 times. You made the choice, and now you reopen the case in your head. You anticipate the meeting, the interview, the conflict, the outcome, and your mind insists that more rehearsal will prevent embarrassment. But if the useful work is already done, then more mental churn can become a tax on the present moment. Review what can still be reviewed, correct what can still be corrected. Then stop feeding a thought that has already spent its value. There is a practical way to use this rule. Set a limit before you begin. One careful read, one check of the facts, one planning pass, one final decision. If the task is small, keep the limit small. If the choice is serious, give it the seriousness it deserves, but not an unlimited stage. Ask yourself, am I gathering information, or am I trying to eliminate the feeling of uncertainty? Those are not the same aim. One leads to action, the other often leads back into the loop. When you notice the mind returning to the same material without new evidence, name it plainly, repetition. That name creates distance. The caution is important. Stoicism does not ask you to become careless or impulsive. A rushed answer can be as unsteady as a spiraling one. The point is not to think less than is necessary, but to stop thinking after thought has done its work. There is a difference between careful review and compulsive reinspection. The first serves judgment, the second serves fear, and fear will always ask for more time, more checking, more reassurance, because it never believes itself fully answered. Make this a daily practice. Choose one recurring task and impose a limit on it. One draft read-through, one calendar check, one decision review. When the limit is reached, close the file and move to the next action that belongs to you. If the thought returns, let it return without reopening the whole trial. You are training the mind to respect completion. In time, that discipline becomes a kind of quiet strength, the ability to look once, judge clearly, and leave the room without dragging the same question behind you. Rule 12 is to ask what action the concern requires. By this point in the video, the pattern should be familiar. The mind produces a sensation, then a story, then a chain of imaginary consequences, and suddenly the day feels smaller than the worry. That is the trap. Overthinking makes every concern sound like an emergency, even when it is only a signal. A message without a reply, a mistake without a repair, a deadline without a plan, a conversation you keep postponing. These do not all belong in the same mental category. Some need action, some need patience, some need a boundary, some need to be left alone. This is where Stoic judgment becomes practical. Chrysippus, in the fragments and reports that survive, is associated with the crucial distinction between an impression and a judgment. Something appears to you. That does not mean you have to accept the first conclusion your mind offers. Before you multiply the worry, pause and ask, what is actually being asked of me here? That question cuts through a great deal of noise because it forces the mind to move from vague alarm to specific responsibility. Epictetus gives the discipline that makes the question usable. He keeps returning to the divide between what is up to you and what is not. Once a concern is in front of you, the task is not to control every possible result. The task is to identify the next response that belongs to you. If the concern requires an apology, give it cleanly. If it requires clarification, ask for it. If it requires a boundary, state it. If it requires nothing at all, do not confuse mental activity with usefulness. That distinction matters because overthinking often disguises itself as diligence. The mind says it is working on it, while it circles the same fear for the 10th time. But reflection that never reaches a decision is not wisdom, it is postponement dressed in seriousness. Ask the question once, carefully, then sort the answer into one of a few honest categories: act, prepare, wait, or release. Not every uncomfortable feeling needs an immediate intervention. Not every uncertainty requires a full internal trial. There is a caution here. This rule is not an excuse to become passive, detached, or emotionally cold. Stoicism does not say, feel nothing. It says, do not let feeling blur your responsibility. A real issue may deserve firm action, and delay may create more damage than discomfort. So the point is not to minimize concerns. The point is to match them with the right scale of response. Small problems do not need epic drama. Serious problems do not need endless rehearsal. Each deserves proportion. Make this a daily practice. When anxiety rises, write the concern in one sentence, then write the action it requires in one line. If there is no action, name that honestly. Nothing is required right now. Do the smallest concrete version within the hour. Send the email, schedule the conversation, set the boundary, gather the facts. After that, stop feeding the loop with extra imagined scenes. A quiet mind is not one that never receives troubling thoughts. It is one that can look at a troubling thought and ask, calmly and exactly, what does this require? And then it answers with the right amount of action, no more and no less. Rule 13 is to build character through repetition. You do not become a steadier person by admiring calm from a distance. You become one by practicing the same response often enough that it starts to feel like part of your nature. That matters because overthinking is rarely a single dramatic event. It is usually a repeated pattern, checking, replaying, second-guessing, reopening what was already settled, and reaching for mental noise the moment discomfort appears. The mind learns those moves the way the body learns posture. Whatever you repeatedly rehearse, you begin to live inside. This is why the Stoics treated character as something trained, not merely wished for. Posidonius, in the fragments and later testimony we have, is useful here because he points toward the power of habit in shaping the inner life. A person does not suddenly become composed because they read one wise paragraph. They become composed by acting with steadiness when the small chance appears, when the message is unanswered, when the meeting feels awkward, when the future stays unclear, when the urge to run 100 scenarios comes back. Each time you choose the disciplined response, you reinforce a different identity. Seneca pushes this idea in a practical direction. He often warns against letting fear live in the future longer than necessary, and he treats reflection as something that should end in action, not endless rehearsal. That is the heart of this rule. Do not let the mind circle the same ground just because it feels active. If you have already reviewed the situation, then the next step is not more review, it is behavior. Send the careful email, set the boundary, make the call, or if nothing further can be done, stop feeding the loop and return to the work in front of you. A useful practice is to create a small replacement ritual for the moment overthinking begins. When the same worry appears, do the same grounding sequence every time. Unclench your jaw, place both feet down, set the phone aside, write the concern in one sentence, and then write the next action in one line. That sequence matters because it teaches the nervous habit of movement. You are not trying to erase the thought, you are training yourself not to obey it automatically. Repetition turns philosophy into reflex. Still, there is a caution here. Repetition can either free you or trap you. If you keep repeating the same anxious checking, the same mental argument, the same fantasy of control, that too becomes character. Stoic training is not about suppressing every feeling or forcing a fake calm. It is about choosing which responses deserve to be strengthened. Calm must be earned through use. It cannot be declared into existence. So begin small and stay consistent. Once today, when the loop starts, interrupt it with one deliberate act of order. Repeat that tomorrow. Over time, the mind recognizes a new path. And that is how a quiet mind is built. Not by grand insight alone, but by the patient accumulation of chosen responses until steadiness becomes familiar. Rule 14 is to make reflection land somewhere. A lot of people believe they are being careful, thoughtful, even morally responsible, when what they are really doing is staying in motion without arriving. The mind keeps drafting the same concerns, revising the same conversation, revisiting the same choice, and calling that seriousness. But if reflection never reaches a decision, a practice, a boundary, or a release, it turns into a polished form of delay. It feels active because the mind is busy. In reality, nothing has been settled. This is where Stoic discipline becomes useful in a very practical way. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that preserve his approach, treats an impression as something that first appears to us, not something that must be accepted immediately. That matters here because reflection is not meant to become endless analysis of every impression. Its role is to examine, test, and then conclude. If the thought is true, accept what follows. If the thought is incomplete, refine it. If the thought is only fear dressed as foresight, let it go. The point is not to keep circling the same inner evidence board forever. Posidonius is especially helpful for this rule because he understood that character is shaped by repeated habits of feeling in response. A person does not become calm through one brilliant insight. Repetition trains the soul. If you repeatedly end your reflection with no decision, you train the mind to distrust closure and to remain attached to unfinished loops. If you repeatedly end reflection with one concrete movement, you train a different pattern. The habit of completion matters. Over time, the mind learns that thought has a job and then must step aside. In daily life, this means giving every serious reflection a final question. What does this require of me now? Sometimes the answer is action. Send the message, make the appointment, begin the draft, set the boundary, or have the hard conversation. Sometimes the answer is discipline. Wait until tomorrow, gather more facts, or sit with uncertainty without adding another story. And sometimes the answer is release. This is not mine to solve today, and I refuse to spend another hour pretending otherwise. Reflection earns its place when it moves you toward one of those endings. Be careful not to confuse decisiveness with recklessness. Stoic reflection is not a race to snap judgment. It is also not the same as emotional shutdown. The aim is to think clearly enough that thought becomes useful. That means you may need a pause, a second look, or a quieter hour before you decide. But once the shape of the answer is clear, keep rehearsing no further. Endless reconsideration often disguises fear of responsibility. A mind that never lands is often avoiding the burden of a chosen path. At the end of any significant reflection, write one line under it: decision, practice, boundary, or release. If none of those appear, the reflection is not finished yet. Keep working until it does. Over time, this teaches the inner life a healthy boundary. Thought is welcomed, examined, and then completed. That is how a quiet mind is built, not by never thinking, but by refusing to let thought live forever without a conclusion. Rule 15 is to face the room you are in. This is the moment when overthinking becomes most obvious. Your body stays in one place, but your attention leaves. You may be sitting at a desk while your mind keeps pacing through a conversation from yesterday. You may be in a meeting, on the train, at dinner, or standing in a kitchen with a phone in your hand. Yet inwardly, you are somewhere else entirely. The room around you becomes thin and blurred while your thoughts build a second stage, one filled with imagined reactions, rehearsed explanations, and outcomes that have not happened. That split is exhausting. It turns ordinary life into a constant act of leaving. The Stoic answer is not to force the mind into blankness. It is to return it to what is actually before you. Cleanthes, in the material that survives from him, gives a strong sense of steadfastness. Continue with duty, continue with purpose, continue with the work that belongs to you even when conditions are uncertain. That is the spirit here. The room you are in is not a distraction from life. It is the place where your response belongs. A real conversation, a real task, a real decision, a real silence, these are not lesser than the thoughts that crowd them. They are the terrain where character is shown. Stoicism teaches that the first appearance of a thing is not yet the final truth about it. What enters the mind as an impression does not have to become a drama. You notice the awkward feeling, the fear of being judged, the urge to replay what was said, and you do not have to follow each of those movements as if they were commands. Instead, you name what is present: a room, a task, a person, a sensation, a judgment trying to form. Then you choose one honest action inside that setting. Listen fully, read the paragraph again, take the next step in front of you. Put the cup down carefully, ask the direct question, finish the sentence you were avoiding. This matters because overthinking thrives on distance. It grows when the mind treats reality as less vivid than speculation. Once you begin to see the room clearly again, the imagined pressure loses some of its authority. That does not mean the fear disappears instantly. It means you stop feeding it with your full attention, or are no longer helping the loop build its own private world. There is a caution here. Returning to the room is not the same as suppressing thought or pretending nothing is wrong. If there is a problem, you still face it. If a decision needs to be made, you still make it. If a boundary is needed, you still set it. But you do those things from contact with reality, not from panic-fed rehearsals. You do not abandon reflection. You end reflection in action. Make this a daily practice. Several times a day, pause and identify 3 things in the room you can actually verify. 1 object, 1 sound, 1 task. What response is mine now? That single question can pull you out of the private movie and back into the living scene. Again and again, the practice is simple. Return to the room and let reality be stronger than the loop. Rule 16 is simple. Do not negotiate with the fear voice as if it were a wise advisor. Fear rarely speaks in a single sentence. It arrives with amendments, caveats, and endless requests for one more round of preparation. It says you need more certainty before you begin, more reassurance before you speak, more time before you decide. And because it sounds urgent, it can wear the costume of reason. That is exactly where Stoic discipline begins. Chrysippus is useful here, because the central move is not to treat every impression as a verdict. A fear-filled thought may be vivid, loud, even persuasive, but it is still only an impression until you grant it authority. The mind presents a claim, you are not required to endorse it. That pause matters. It creates a gap between stimulus and surrender. In that gap, you can ask whether the thought is describing reality or merely demanding control over it. Epictetus sharpens the rule further. Some things are up to you, and some are not. The opinion of others, the future result, the perfect timing, the possibility of discomfort, all of that sits outside your command. What belongs to you is the choice to act with clarity, honesty, and steadiness in this moment. Fear loves to blur that boundary. It tries to turn every unknown into a reason for paralysis. Stoicism restores the boundary and puts your attention back where it can actually work. In practical life, this means the fear voice does not get to run a long internal trial every time you want to take a step. If you have checked what needs checking, then move. If you have prepared enough to begin, then begin. You do not have to feel fully safe before sending the message, making the appointment, sharing the idea, or entering the difficult conversation. Courage is not the absence of uncertainty, it is the refusal to let uncertainty become a veto. There is a caution here. Stoicism is not the denial of risk, and it is not reckless momentum dressed up as virtue. Some fears point to real limits, real responsibilities, real practical needs. So the answer is not to ignore every warning. The answer is to sort the warning from the spiral. Real caution leads to a clear adjustment. Rumination leads to the same loop, only louder. One protects action, the other postpones it. When fear becomes a habit, it can feel like truth because it is familiar. That is why this rule has to be practiced, not merely understood. Once a day, notice where you are waiting for perfect confidence before you move. Name the fear voice plainly, not prophecy, not wisdom, not command, just fear. Then choose one small action that belongs to you anyway. Send the draft, open the document, ask the question, make the first move before the inner committee has finished its speech. Repeat that practice often enough, and the voice does not need to disappear for you to live differently. It only needs to lose its authority. The goal is not a mind with no fear. The goal is a mind that refuses to confuse fear with guidance and returns again and again to what can actually be done now. Rule 17 is to accept that you will not control every outcome. In the middle of a career move, a relationship strain, a family decision, or a reply that never comes, the mind starts trying to become a weather system. It forecasts, revises, panics, and then tries again. The exhaustion often comes not from the event itself, but from the fantasy that if you think hard enough, you can eliminate uncertainty. You cannot. What you can do is refuse to let uncertainty become a private command center for fear. This is where the Stoic split between what belongs to you and what does not becomes decisive. Epictetus makes the point with unusual clarity in his surviving teaching. Some things are up to us, and some are not. That is not a slogan about Stoic calm. It is a discipline of attention. Your choices, your preparation, your honesty, your courage, your refusal to lie to yourself, these are within your power. The final shape of events is not. Chrysippus's logic supports the same conclusion from another angle. An impression arrives, but it is not yet a judgment. If you immediately add, "This will ruin everything," or "I must make this impossible outcome disappear," you are no longer seeing the event. You are serving the story attached to it. Practically, this means shifting from outcome management to response management. Before the meeting, ask, "What is mine to do?" During the delay, ask, "What action is still available?" After the setback, ask, "What is the next worthy step?" That question cuts through mental noise because it returns you to agency. A quiet mind does not come from predicting the future with perfect accuracy. It comes from knowing where your responsibility begins and ends. Still, there is a caution here. Acceptance is not passivity, and it is not emotional surrender. Stoicism does not tell you to stop caring about results. It tells you not to chain your peace to them. If you confuse acceptance with apathy, you will become careless. If you confuse control with virtue, you will become frantic. The goal is neither numbness nor obsession. The goal is steadiness, effort without clinging, preparation without illusion, attention without collapse. Make this a daily practice in small, repeatable moments. When a plan changes, pause before you blame yourself or the world. Say inwardly, "The outcome is larger than me. My response is still mine." Then choose one concrete action. Send the message, clarify the fact, take the walk, finish the task, wait without spiraling. Over time, that habit reshapes the mind. It teaches you that uncertainty is a condition of life, not a signal to surrender your composure. A person who can act well without controlling everything is no longer governed by the loop. He stands inside reality, not above it. Rule 18 is to stop making predictions your prison. The mind likes forecasts because a forecast can feel like control. If you can name every possible outcome, you seem prepared for all of them. But that feeling is deceptive. Too often, prediction turns into a closed room where you keep pacing the same floorboards, trying to outrun uncertainty by imagining it in advance. The result is not clarity, it is fatigue. You begin to treat every possibility like a fact that demands emotional payment right now. Stoicism cuts straight through that habit. A future event is not yet in front of you. It is not a command. It is not an emergency simply because your imagination has placed it on a stage. Seneca writes again and again about how people suffer in advance, borrowing trouble from days that have not arrived. That does not mean ignoring danger. It It means refusing to live as if every feared outcome has already happened. A thoughtful person prepares. A restless person rehearses. This is where the Stoic discipline matters. Distinguish preparation from obsession. Chrysippus, in the fragmentary tradition that survives through later reports, helps clarify the crucial point that an impression is not yet a judgment. A thought appears, this will go badly. That is only an impression. It becomes a prison only when you rush to assent, when you add certainty, narrative, and emotional collapse to a possibility that has not earned that status. The gap between first impression and final judgment is where freedom lives. So when your mind starts projecting a disaster, do not argue with every detail. Instead, ask a calmer question. What, if anything, is actually mine to prepare for now? Maybe one email needs a careful draft. Maybe a conversation needs a few honest notes. Maybe a decision needs a deadline. Do that work once, clearly and with limits. Then stop feeding the machine. You are not building wisdom by running every scenario through your head 10 times. You are training helplessness in a polished suit. There is also a caution here. Stoicism is not an excuse to become careless or overly confident. Some prediction is useful. You do need to notice patterns, estimate consequences, and plan responsibly. The danger begins when planning stops serving action and starts replacing it. If you catch yourself collecting hypothetical problems faster than you are solving real ones, the mind has drifted from prudence into performance. At that point, your task is not more forecasting. It is returning to the present evidence and the next concrete step. Make this a daily practice. In the morning, name the 2 or 3 real risks that deserve attention. Write them down plainly. Then add one line beside each. What can I do today, if anything? If the answer is nothing, let the concern remain unfinished. In the evening, add a final note. What happened? What did I learn? What remains? This is where the discipline is forged. Notice how many predictions never came to pass and how much of your day was spent paying interest on imagined events. The goal is not to become indifferent. It is to become exact. Predict only enough to prepare, and no farther. The future does not need your constant rehearsal. It needs your steadiness when it arrives. Rule 19 is to replace rumination with a ritual. When the day is noisy and the mind has too much room to wander, it often returns to the same concern again and again, not because the concern is always useful, but because the mind prefers a familiar track. A text message, a mistake in a meeting, a difficult conversation, a decision you have delayed, these can become loops. The problem is not only the thought itself, it is the absence of a next step, so the mind keeps circling in place, trying to create relief by replaying the same scene. Stoicism does not ask you to win an argument against your own thoughts. It asks you to govern them. Chrysippus, in the fragments and later reports that survive, is often used to clarify a simple but powerful point. An impression is not yet a judgment. A thought arrives. That doesn't mean you have to live inside it. If you treat every passing fear as a command, the mind becomes a servant of noise. But if you pause long enough to separate what appeared from what is actually true and useful, you create a gap where choice can enter. That is where ritual matters, not as superstition and not as a dramatic performance, but as a dependable shape for attention. Write the concern in one line. Keep it plain, not a paragraph, not a trial, not a prophecy. Then write one action that belongs to you. If the concern is a conversation, the action might be to draft the message carefully, ask one clear question, or wait until a better hour to respond. If the concern is a task, the action might be the first 10 minutes, not the whole project. A ritual works because it turns vague fear into a sequence the body can follow. Posidonius is a useful anchor here, because he understood, at least in the fragments and later testimony available to us, that emotional patterns are trained through repetition. Character is not changed by one strong insight alone. It is shaped by what you practice when the feeling returns. Each time you interrupt the spiral with the same calm procedure, you are not merely coping with a single bad moment. You are weakening the habit of helpless rehearsal and strengthening the habit of action. The caution is important. A ritual is not an excuse to pretend every concern can be solved in 5 minutes. Some matters require patience, and some require waiting. The point is not to force an answer where none is ready. The point is to keep rumination from masquerading as work. Rewriting the same fear for an hour feels busy, but it often produces no movement at all. A Stoic ritual respects uncertainty without worshiping it. So make the practice small enough to survive an ordinary day. One line for the concern, one line for the action, one physical movement that breaks the trance. Close the notebook, stand up, drink water, begin the first step, or return to the room you are in. Repeated every time the loop appears, this becomes a discipline of redirection. The mind is not being crushed. It is being taught a path. And when thought has a path, it stops wandering the same circle and starts serving the life in front of you. Rule 20 is to let duty silence noise. By this point in the journey, the pattern should be familiar. Overthinking does not usually arrive as wisdom. It arrives as motion without direction. The mind circles, compares, delays, and rehearses. It asks for one more thought, one more scenario, one more private debate. Meanwhile, the body is still living in the present, and the work in front of you is still waiting. That gap between endless mental motion and actual responsibility is where anxiety tends to grow louder. Stoicism answers that gap with duty, not dramatic purpose, not self-punishing pressure, just the clear recognition that some things belong to you right now. Cleanthes is an important anchor for this rule, because the surviving hymn associated with him portrays a world ordered by purpose, where human beings are not asked to control everything, but to continue in accordance with nature and duty. In the fragmentary remains of Stoic teaching, that spirit comes through clearly. Endurance is not standing still and hoping fear gets tired. Endurance is steady work under strain. That matters because duty gives the mind a shape. A vague fear can spread across the whole day. A real obligation has edges. Send the honest message. Finish the report. Wash the dishes. Make the appointment. Keep the promise you already made. Speak plainly. Move your body. Tidy the room. The task does not need to be grand to be effective. In fact, the smaller and more concrete it is, the more easily it cuts through the static of unnecessary thought. This is also where Stoic discipline becomes practical rather than theatrical. If you keep telling yourself, I need to feel calmer before I begin, you may wait forever. Duty reverses that logic. Begin and calm may follow, or it may not. Either way, beginning is still the correct act. The point is not to force emotion into silence through aggression. The point is to stop giving every passing thought equal authority. A duty deserves more weight than a fear fantasy. There is a caution here. Duty is not a weapon for self-attack. Some people hear this kind of teaching and turn it into harshness. Work harder, think less, never rest, never hesitate. That is not Stoic clarity. That is just another form of noise. Real duty is proportionate. It includes rest when rest is part of the task. It includes care when care is needed. It includes honesty about limits. A person can be devoted without being frantic and disciplined without being brittle. Try this in daily life. When your thoughts begin to spiral, stop asking, what if, and ask, what is the duty of this moment? Not the duty of your entire life, not the duty of the next 5 years, just this moment. Maybe it is to answer one email carefully. Maybe it is to take one deep breath and then make one phone call. Maybe it is to sit down and begin the work you have been postponing. Then do only that. Let the next duty reveal itself afterward. Used this way, duty becomes a quiet governor of the mind. It does not erase uncertainty. It gives uncertainty a place to stand while you keep moving, and often that is enough to break the spell of overthinking. Not a perfect answer, but a faithful action. Rule 21 is to make peace with imperfect decisions. By the time you reach this point in the video, the pattern should be familiar. Overthinking is rarely just thinking too much. It is usually a refusal to let the mind settle on a course while uncertainty remains in the room. The pressure of modern life makes that refusal feel reasonable. There are too many messages, too many options, too many invisible consequences attached to every choice. So the mind tries to buy safety with more rehearsal. It keeps asking, what if I choose wrong? What if I regret it? What if someone thinks less of me because of the choice I made? Stoicism answers that pressure by changing the standard. A good decision is not one that guarantees a perfect outcome. A good decision is one made with attention, honesty, and a willingness to act on what is actually available. That is where Chrysippus matters here. In the Stoic line of thought associated with him, an impression is not yet a judgment. A situation arrives first, the mind then adds its conclusions. Overthinking often turns a difficult choice into a drama before the choice has even been made. Chrysippus helps us see that the drama is not the event itself. It is the extra story we keep attaching to the event. Once that is seen clearly, the task becomes simpler. You do not need to predict every branch of the future before you move. You need to judge the present as accurately as you can, choose what is reasonable, and then accept that the rest belongs to time. Epictetus offers the practical discipline for this. Do what is up to you. And stop demanding mastery over what is not. You can choose carefully. You can ask better questions. You can check your reasons. You cannot force the future to sign your approval in advance. That shift matters because indecision often disguises itself as wisdom. It tells you that refusing to choose is safer than choosing imperfectly. But in real life, delay also has a cost. Relationships drift, opportunities expire, tensions harden, small problems grow teeth while you keep circling them in your head. Sometimes the most rational thing you can do is make the best available decision and then carry it with steadiness rather than theatrics. There is a caution here. Stoicism does not ask you to become careless, impulsive, or indifferent to consequences. It does not praise hasty action dressed up as courage. If the decision deserves more thought, give it real thought. Gather the facts. Consult the people who matter. Weigh what is at stake. But once you've done that work, stop treating uncertainty as a reason to keep reopening the case forever. Reflection is useful only when it leads somewhere. A simple daily practice can train this. When you face a decision, write down 3 things: what you know, what you don't know, and what action remains in your control today. Then, choose the next step and close the notebook. Later, if the mind returns to the old circle, do not argue with it for an hour. Just repeat the structure: fact, unknown, action. Over time, you teach yourself that imperfect decisions are not a moral collapse. They are part of a life actually being lived. The quiet mind is not built by demanding certainty. It is built by learning how to move without being ruled by the need for it. Rule 22 is to use night reflection to release the day. By evening, the mind is often tired but still active in the wrong direction. It replays the message you sent, the sentence you wish you had phrased better, the decision that felt uncertain, the conversation that seemed to carry a hidden meaning. In the dark, ordinary events can grow louder than they deserve. A small mistake becomes a verdict. A passing awkwardness becomes a future. Sleep is near, but the mind keeps staging one more inspection. Stoicism does not ask you to pretend the day was flawless. It asks for a cleaner ending. Epictetus is useful here because he keeps bringing attention back to what belongs to you. Not the whole chain of outcomes, but the use you made of the moment, the choice you had available, the response you can still govern. Night reflection serves that boundary. It is not a courtroom where you prosecute yourself endlessly. It is a brief review of what was within your power, what was not, and what should be carried forward tomorrow. Seneca, in his letters, treats evening reflection as a discipline of honest self-examination, not a theater of shame. The point is to look at the day in full light before it disappears into memory. Where did you act well? Where did you drift? Where did fear speak too loudly? Where did you waste attention on things that could not answer you? Then, just as important, where can you repair, improve, or simply let go, because further mental chewing will not produce wisdom. Reflection that never reaches release becomes another form of overthinking. This is where the practice becomes practical. Keep the review short enough to be useful and specific enough to be real. You might write 3 lines: 1 thing done well, 1 thing to improve, 1 thing to leave with the night. If an argument is still echoing, ask whether there is an action to take tomorrow. If not, stop feeding it. If a worry is about a future that has not arrived, mark it as unfinished business and set it aside. If a regret is genuine, turn it into a correction. That is how reflection becomes training instead of rumination. A caution matters here. Night reflection is not permission to reopen your wounds every evening or to build a habit of self-criticism disguised as growth. If your review turns into a spiral, you have gone past Stoic practice and back into mental repetition. The aim is clarity, not punishment. The aim is to leave the day with a settled mind, even if the day itself was imperfect. Make this a simple ritual. At the same hour each night, sit down for a few minutes, write briefly, and close the notebook with intention. Dim the room, put away the phone, let the day end where it actually ends. The body needs rest, and the mind needs a boundary. When you train that boundary consistently, the evening stops becoming another arena for argument. It becomes a quiet threshold. The day is examined, the lesson is kept, the rest is released. Rule 23 is to build a mind that can stand alone. Not lonely, not hardened, simply no longer dependent on noise for direction. This matters because overthinking often feeds on company it does not admit it wants. It keeps reaching for reassurance, for a second opinion, for one more glance at the message thread, one more check of the inbox, one more scan of someone else's face for clues about how to feel. The mind starts acting like it cannot hold itself upright unless the world keeps propping it up. That is exhausting, and it quietly gives away your freedom. Stoicism answers that condition by returning authority to the ruling part of the self. Epictetus teaches, in effect, that what disturbs us is not the thing itself, but the judgment we attach to it, and that our true work is to govern what belongs to us. If your peace rises and falls with every reaction around you, then your attention has been leased to the crowd. A mind that stands alone is not a mind that rejects people. It is a mind that can meet people without collapsing into them. Seneca is especially useful here because he keeps pulling us back from borrowed life. In his letters, he often warns against living as if time were endlessly available for hesitation, performance, and self-absorption. The habit of mental dependence does not just steal calm, it steals the day. You wait for permission, you wait for certainty, you wait for the feeling that everything is safe before you act. But self-command does not arrive after the world becomes easy. It is built while the world remains unfinished. So practice this in small, concrete ways. Sit alone for a few minutes without reaching for escape. Walk a block without checking your phone. Begin a task before you feel perfectly ready. When a thought appears demanding immediate reassurance, do not obey it at once. Let it stand there unarmed for a moment. Ask whether it is a fact, a fear, or a habit wearing the mask of urgency. That pause is not passive. It is training. There is also a caution here. Standing alone is not the same as becoming self-enclosed, proud, or emotionally numb. Stoic independence is not a performance of indifference. It is the ability to remain steady enough to listen, decide, and care without being dragged around by approval or alarm. You still speak to others, still work with others, still learn from others. You simply stop making their constant reactions the foundation of your inner life. Posidonius helps illuminate that point in a broad, fragmentary way through later testimony. Repeated responses shape character. If you repeatedly surrender your center the moment discomfort appears, you train dependence. If you repeatedly return to yourself, you train steadiness. Character is not transformed by one dramatic insight. It is carved by repeated acts of refusal, restraint, and return. Make this a daily practice. Choose one quiet interval each day where no message, no feed, and no outside voice gets to lead. Let the mind feel its own weight. Let it learn that silence is not danger. Then carry that same steadiness into the crowded hours. The goal is not to stop needing all support. The goal is to stop needing noise in order to know who is steering. That is how the quiet mind becomes free. Rule 24 is the final one. End the loop with one clear action today. Not tomorrow, not after one more round of analysis. Today. That is where overthinking begins to lose its grip. When the mind is no longer allowed to circle endlessly without consequence, and is instead asked to produce a single, concrete response. By this point in the chapter, the pattern should be familiar. A conversation replays, a message gets drafted and redrafted, a decision stays suspended because you are trying to predict every future reaction before you move. The result feels like mental effort, but it often becomes a kind of paralysis dressed as caution. Stoic practice does not ask you to become careless. It asks you to separate thought from action, and then to refuse the lie that endless rehearsal is the same thing as wisdom. This is where Posidonius gives a useful anchor. In the Stoic tradition preserved through fragments and later testimony, he is associated with the way repeated emotional responses form character. In other words, a loop is not harmless just because it is silent. Repeated rumination becomes a habit of the soul. The mind learns the path it walks most often. If you keep returning to fear without acting, fear becomes more familiar than courage. If you keep revisiting a problem without choosing anything, indecision starts to feel like identity. The Stoic answer is not to suppress the thought, it is to finish the circuit. Name the problem, reduce it to what is actually yours to do, and then do one thing that proves you are still governing yourself. If the issue is a difficult conversation, send the respectful message or set the time for it. If the issue is a task you have avoided, begin with 10 focused minutes. If the issue is an apology, make it clean and without decoration. If the issue is a boundary, state it plainly. One action is enough to restore contact with reality. Seneca's writing often returns to the waste of living in imagined time, as though the future were already in your hands. But the future is not where your duty lives. Duty is here, in the present hour, in the next small step that can be taken without drama. And if the situation remains uncertain after that step, then uncertainty has been met correctly, not by pretending to know the ending, but by acting well within the scene you actually occupy. There is a caution here. One action is not the same as a rash action. Stoicism never asks for impulsiveness disguised as courage. The point is not to move fast just to feel relief. The point is to move clearly, after proper thought, and then stop feeding the loop with more imaginary versions of the same event. Reflection should leave behind a decision, a boundary, a practice, or a release. If it leaves behind only another layer of anxiety, it has not yet done its work. So make this the end of the day's mental spiral. Choose one clear action and complete it today. Write the message, make the call, start the task, tidy the space, decide. Then let the mind witness something stronger than worry, proof that judgment can become conduct. That is how a quiet mind is built, not by perfect certainty, but by repeated moments in which you stop circling and finally act. If this lesson helped you, like the video, subscribe to the Inner Citadel, and comment with the situation you want handled with Stoic